I'm really interested in everything beyond identity. It's obviously not a sponsored podcast or anything like that. I've been following
Mhm.
you guys for quite a while, so I'm really interested to have our conversation.
No, thanks for having me, Joe. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and they're really great and fun and interesting. So I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's interesting. When I started this podcast, right, 4.5 years ago at this point, the biggest critique that I got from people was, well, how are you going to find people to come on? Who would want to go and talk to you? What are you even going to talk about? Right? Like, is your skill set that deep that you
Mhm.
think that you can actually talk to everyone and anyone? Right. And, um, for myself, right, I guess I'm a bit of an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And for myself, when I heard that, it was just like, well, none of those questions even matter. Right. Like, I'm going to do it. And if it fails, it fails. And if it works, great. Right. Like, never intended on like making money from it or gaining
Mhm.
popularity or anything like that. Really just intended on having good conversations with people.
Right. Well, that's you. You truly are an entrepreneur. That's the startup mentality. You jump first, and then you check to see if you have a parachute afterwards.
Yeah, 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 100%. That's the thing. I kind of wish that I had gone down more heavily the entrepreneur route right after
Mhm.
college,
Mhm.
right? Because I tell everyone, like, in your 20s, I mean, like, you more than likely have nothing going on, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're starting your career, you're probably graduating
Mhm.
college, right? If you went to college, you do, hopefully, you don't have a family, right? Like, you're not
Mhm.
married or anything like that. You don't have a house, right? So
Mhm.
it's very different. If I was to go all in and be an entrepreneur right now, it's pretty scary. And I've had on entrepreneurs that are doing that right now, where they're in their
Mhm.
mid to late 30s. They have a young
Mhm.
family, several
Mhm.
kids under like 2 or 3 years old, and they're
Yep.
just starting this entrepreneur thing. And I'm like, man, I do not have the cojones that
Mhm.
that you have. That's for sure.
So, it's interesting, and my wife sometimes calls it a character flaw. But you really have to have a passion for this kind of thing. You really have to want to create new things. And starting early is great, but startups at any age, it really comes down to, do you have a passion for a problem? The rest of it you'll figure out. But as long as you have a known problem in the market and there's a passion for it, you get it validated, then the market's like calling you, and you just need to commit to it and go. In the end, that's kind of what brought me. I've done, I think, 5 or 6 different startups through the years. In my early years, they all were a disaster, in my early 20s. But I learned a lot. But there was always a passion for that. And then through the years, I've gone to a lot of different startups, and no regrets. It's a different path. And I encourage everybody to really think about it. It's a great opportunity to kind of change things in the market.
Yeah. Yeah, and America is probably one of a handful of countries where that's even possible.
Mhm.
Like, when I think of starting a business of any
Mhm.
kind, right? Like, I mean, technically, I guess this podcast is a business,
Yeah.
to some extent. And when I think of that, right, like, it's a way to generate your own income, to be your own boss, to not
Mhm.
really rely on someone else
Mhm.
to pay your mortgage, right?
Mhm.
Um, but in other countries, that's really not possible, not to the extent that it is here,
Right.
right? And I think that's a huge benefit, that we have, that a lot of people don't even identify and don't even, realize what it is. I was having a conversation with someone who, he went to University of Chicago, right? Got his
Mhm.
bachelor's degree from University of
Yeah, great
Chicago, got a
school.
master's degree, super smart guy,
Mhm.
but hasn't followed the trajectory that someone of that pedigree, would have
Mhm.
expected to have followed, right? And he was talking to me, about like the marketplace. And y- he got into this debate, right, where some people are paid more than teachers, for
Mhm,
instance, and whatever it might be, right? And my wife is a teacher, so
mhm.
I
So
totally
is
get
mine.
it, and it's like, yeah, they totally should actually be getting paid
Mhm.
more, right? And in other countries,
Absolutely.
they do actually get paid a lot more than doctors.
Mhm,
Um, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to the value that you bring to the marketplace. And a part of that value is actually identifying the gaps in the marketplace
right.
and filling those gaps, right? So,
Mhm,
I always tell everyone, right, when I was getting into IT slash security, I was looking for my niche. And
mhm.
so at the time, like the cloud was brand new. Basically, it was just a few years into the
Oh,
cloud.
yeah.
And I figured, okay, cloud security is going to be a thing. More companies are going to be moving into the cloud. More companies are probably going to be solely in the cloud, right? So
Mhm.
that means that they're going to need cloud security. And I think the CCSP cert was like brand new at the time.
Right.
And so I started going down the path of cloud security long before people thought of it as like it being its own domain, right? And it's still
Mhm.
kind of people still kind of don't understand that it is its own beast
Mhm.
in and of
Mhm.
itself. But I'm not forming a business around that. I literally just identified a area in the marketplace that was lacking and started executing on
Mhm.
getting more knowledge on it, more training on
Right.
it, getting the certifications and making the jump into the field.
Yeah, I hope just two funny stories on something you said, and then I'll jump right into why that's a great message for individuals who want to get into cybersecurity. Um, don't ever think it just get started, but when you're talking about the U.S. and startups, um, the very first startup I did in '95, I was working for a French company at the time in their R&D, and then when I told them I was going to do a startup, they just looked at me like, what do you mean? What is that? How can you leave a company and go do something else? How is that even possible? So that was really interesting. They thought that that was strange. Um, and then on to what you were saying just a minute ago. I think that's right. With cybersecurity, individuals, at least my experience is very eclectic. I started out in aerospace engineering, computation and fluid dynamics. Was dead set on going into industry application engineer, CFD expert, and had a lot of opportunities there. But I got sucked into grid computing because that's when computers where we started to get into this grid computing. They were cheap and scalable, and I found out that I had a passion for software, and then that led into go into the history if you want to, but it eventually one thing led to another. I ended up doing a deep packet inspection, worked on some of the first security gateways back in the early aughts, and session border controllers for VoIP network, which radically changed everything. Then after that, when I done that, I said, what am I going to do next? I ended up doing banking security, which is back. This is back in 2007. We built multi-factor phishing resistant authenticators before there were even iPhones.
Hmm.
And people were telling us, you're crazy. No one's ever going to tap a personal device to authenticate. And it's just so it was early on, and then worked on some of the first large-scale verifiable credential deployments for digital offers and distributed supply chains, um, and then ended up at Beyond Identity and all of that. So you never know where you're going to end up, and you never know where you're going to start. But if the people listening here, if they have a passion for system engineering, solving problems, and they like a lot of different aspects of that technology, then cybersecurity is a great place for them. Because even today, like you talked about the cloud, I mean, everything's accelerating. And one of the kind of the themes I kind of learned, or the things that I started to grok over time through my career, is that security has to be moved into the product early, right? And I kept seeing that over and over again. And I think, again, for your listeners here, if they're getting into cybersecurity, it's no longer a bolt-on thing anymore. You're going to be key to the product development. Certainly, if you're at a startup, you will be part of that. Secure by design, compliant by design, privacy by design. These are all real things now. And we have cybersecurity people, data privacy people at the table at inception of the product.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a huge thing, right? There's a lot to unpack there that you brought up, and I think I kind of discovered my passion for security in that early, help desk role that I had where
Hmm.
it like it, looking back on it, it wasn't quite help desk. It was like part help desk and part, engineer to some degree.
Yep.
And you had to really understand the underlying processes and services, how they operated, what they did in their startup process or their shutdown process, right? Because in that role, I was working with E911 systems, right? So
Okay. Yep.
there's a database of information. Sometimes when you do an upgrade, things fail, right? And you have to
Hmm.
really kind of work through it. And of course, it was always my luck that I would get the most random, most difficult, issues that would happen.
Of course.
I was basically a part of the QA team without being a part of the QA team, because when they would say that it's ready for production, I would have a line of customers ready to go.
Oh
And
yeah.
we would be running into just the most random things where, like, I have to go get the dev that wrote the code
Oh
that
yeah.
is dealing with this thing because we don't know what's going on right now. And but having that reverse engineering mentality
Hmm.
benefits you so significantly in security, that
Absolutely.
like it pays so many dividends down the road.
It's the some of the best. It's funny you say that because I'm in the Dallas office. We have a New York office, and the support team sits right over here in the QA team. And that story that you just described plays out every single day here. And some of the best systems engineers I know are on the security side, support and security side. They're either deployment engineers, support engineers, cybersecurity. And if you're a support engineer, you really have to be a Swiss Army knife, right? Because you're
Yep.
getting pulled into every direction.
Yeah, yeah, the that's so true. Looking
Mhm.
back on it, right? I didn't think of it at the time, but you're learning Postgres, you're
Mhm.
learning, Apache web servers, you're learning Linux,
Yep.
you're learning Python while you're doing it all in Bash script. You're learning, I mean, there was even a point in time where I was learning, PKI certificates,
Yep.
distributing the keys and how to initialize it on the system and attach it to the web app and all this other stuff, right? And then, SE Linux, right? The beast of SE Linux, really kind of close to when SE Linux like started to
Oh
actually come
yeah.
out. Um,
I
you
used to
know,
be a
and
kernel developer.
oh man, you know, it's funny because our devs, we worked with a lot of federal agencies and everything, so they always
Mhm.
required SE Linux to be, turned
Of
on and
course.
enabled and whatnot. And the dev that was supposed to design that module of our application, he never actually like ran it in production. He created it, got it working for this one top
Yeah.
secret environment, right, and never looked at it again. And several years had gone by, and now I have a whole bunch of customers that want SE Linux running, but every time it starts up, the application completely crashes.
Hmm.
It doesn't start anything, right? So now I'm reading the NSA's documents on SE Linux, trying to figure out how to make these exceptions and, going through and learning like, oh, each and every single command process service that is tied to this application needs to be whitelisted. It's not a normal whitelisting process. You
Hmm.
have to run
Hmm.
these string of commands to run through it, right? Like, and but that sort of thing develops you into that Swiss Army knife, and no
Oh,
one
that's
was
right.
doing that beforehand. Like I couldn't, it wasn't like a Googleable like
No, it wasn't.
problem. It really
No.
wasn't. It was like, hey, here's this document that the NSA wrote. Go figure
Hmm.
out how to use that information and
Hmm.
correct it over here because like we can't lose the contract. The contract is worth several $1,000,000. We're a small startup. Like this is something that needs to be done.
Yeah, the first, again, to reiterate that, or just to double down on that, and I've led uh, product teams, engineering teams, CTO, COO, CISO. I've kind of done the whole. I worked at a company that a VC firm that bootstrapped energy companies, like
Hmm.
small energy uh, startups, and I would went and bootstrap the engineering, the technology. get them going, and then go to the next one. At the end of the day, the person you go to first to understand how the system works is the deployment engineer and the support engineer, because they're the ones who are going to tell you how the customer is using the product and how it's deployed, and your solution architects. Don't get me wrong, the engineers are they're the engine, right, in engineering. Um, but sometimes, they'll be very super technical and very focused. So I totally get that, and that is kind of um, when you talk about those historically, those roles have been quite separate. But I think we're seeing now, certainly with your security engineers, your privacy engineers, and your product engineers, even support and deployment, they're all starting to collaborate very tightly. Kind of like, in the past, it was DevSecOps. You had your walls, right? And younger engineers probably can't even imagine a world before DevSecOps. It's the same with security and product. It's heading in that direction very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And there's new, with AI becoming more prevalent
Uh,
and LLMs, there's whole new domains of security that are being created right in front of us, right? And there, I always keep my eye on the job market just to see
mhm.
how it's performing,
Yep.
what the trends are and everything. And I'm slowly starting to see AI security roles open up, right?
Oh yeah.
At like normal companies that aren't NVIDIA, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and I'm watching this industry start to pivot because now
Mhm.
everyone is saying, oh, we're going to incorporate AI into our
Sure.
platform, into our solution, into our offering and
Hmm.
whatnot. We're going to offset this headcount. But companies are slowly starting to wake up to the fact of, oh, that's a totally different kind of security that we have to provide. I mean, there isn't
Yeah.
even true, AI security products on the market right now. I mean, there's a couple offerings out there, but I haven't
Hmm.
seen anything that like, you know, is like truly built for it. It's kind of like a bolt on
Hmm.
sort of thing.
Yeah. No, that's a great observation. And again, when you look at kind of how the threat landscape has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years, um, and the cost benefit analysis, like people who have their current, and one of the points that Beyond Identity always makes is that legacy MFA is not good enough. Legacy solutions are good enough because the landscape has changed. And if you haven't been popped, it's not because you're good, it's probably because you haven't been targeted. And the whole cost benefit analysis for some of those APTs has radically changed. Um, and it's that yeah, that landscape has completely changed. And then you layer on AI on top of that, and it accelerates the scope, whether it's malware as a service, phishing as a service. You layer on AI, and then all of a sudden your threat landscape. Let's put aside the innovative attacks and the new enablement attacks like deepfakes, but just on top of the legacy stuff, the scope and scale just explodes, and you can't defend. Um, and then AI is going to augment products, and everybody just puts a AI stamp on their product, just like back in the day you had a Windows certified hard drive, and you're like, what does that even mean? Well, it's Windows certified. Um, but so there are a lot of products out there, and people have to be careful when they're stamped with AI. So there's the augmentation part, and there's a lot of value that can be added there. But then on the other side, you have a whole new category of uh, security that needs to be figured out because all these companies, ourselves included, um, they're trying to figure out how to use AI internally, and it's going to explode the use of information that otherwise wasn't accessible or used within the organization is now being exposed through these LLMs. And we've spent all this time kind of as a security engineer trying to make sure that the data is anonymized and you can't de-anonymize it. And we patted ourselves on the back, right? Done, figured it out. And now we put an LLM in front of it, and the LLM itself is de-anonymizing the data because when you ask it questions, you don't really know how it's going to answer, and you're getting all kinds of data leaks and privacy violations. It's kind of crazy. And then just the fundamental architecture with RAGs and daisy chained LLMs. It needs a whole new authentication. And Beyond Identity feels it has a position there for sure. But there's things called pre-inference ABAC, which is you come in and before you actually execute the prompt, you have to map it to the policy domain, map that to annotated data to make sure you restrict the data. You pull that, you put it into the LLM. So there's all kinds of stuff that's radically changed. And it's kind of
Hmm.
exciting. And I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities, again, for security, cybersecurity. People in cybersecurity are going to be front and center.
Yeah. Yeah, people ask me if I'm worried about AI taking my job, and I'm sitting here like, no, no, AI doesn't augment, but it 10x's me, right? Like
Yep.
you really have to use it. I'm getting my PhD right
Oh,
now, and
congratulations.
I mean, don't congratulate me yet until I actually get it. It's
Kudos to
it,
you going
it's
after it.
it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult. It's probably 10 times more difficult than
Mhm,
I expected going into it.
mhm,
Um, but I think the reward at the end will be worth it for sure. But I'm getting my PhD. I'm studying deploying zero trust frameworks on communication satellites with the sole purpose of
interesting.
preparing them for post quantum encryption. Because really, like that's where everything is going. That's where like the next major war will
Mhm,
start. Right, it's going
mhm,
to start in space long before it starts on the ground.
mhm.
Um, because how else are adversarial militaries going to intercept communications and
Yep.
hack a country, right? Like you would
Mhm,
start with the satellite, really. um but in that, right, I'm using Grok heavily,
mhm,
heavily,
mhm,
right? And the whole purpose is because with when I started my research, I was using Google to try and find, scholarly articles that,
mhm,
support my research in different ways. And it was very difficult to find, you know, just reliable sources, material that I would actually be able to use, anything
mhm.
like that. I mean, it was just very impossible basically. So I went over to ChatGPT, started using that a bit. It definitely provided me more value, but it wasn't able to go deeper
Hmm.
than what the text was giving me. And this is,
Yep.
a year ago, right? And then I started comparing it with Grok, and Grok was able to give me like precise information. Hey, this document matters because of this table. They did this work. Here's the
Oh,
actual
interesting. I'll have
quote.
to try Grok
Like,
out.
yeah, everything.
Mhm,
I've made requests of Grok before and it didn't give me, a result or whatever it might be. I think it's because I'm literally like
mhm.
hitting limits in the chat window of
Yep.
how much text is actually in that chat. Um, but it gives me exactly what I'm looking for, like every single time, and I've
Mhm.
I've had it, even like write me some code. And I'm not a developer by any means, but it gets me 85% of the way there. And I'm smart
Yeah.
enough to know what to adjust and
Mhm,
how to plug in different things, right? So like it's literally being used to
mhm.
augment me in a way that would take me years to get through, you know?
Yeah. So a couple things. One of the things, the biggest issue I have is doing research. And again, everything I do now is AI assisted. Certainly, all the research and the synthesis of information, but it's attribution. That's a real
Yeah.
problem because the LLM will, again, they call it hallucinations, but it's confident about everything, right? And so I won't really reference anything or use it unless I have strong attribution. Um, and no, that's pretty important. And then the other thing is, and I don't know really how this is going to shake out with AI, honestly, but I have a sense that people like yourself and systems engineers are going to be 10x, right? And I agree with that. The people can think from a system perspective, and then the individuals who can't bridge that gap and get to the system level and become, you know, systems engineers are going to really struggle because I've been using AI, Claude, Cursor, all kinds of AI tools, and it's actually writing kernel code that just works, right? I mean, it's
Wow.
just, I mean, I've done all the way from UI development, back-end development, process productivity work, and the AI stuff just really works now. 2 or 3 years ago, it was still, what it
It was a
was,
joke.
but it actually, you can write serious code with it.
Hmm.
And I think and then you'll see, I think the cybersecurity industry is really going to be impacted in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of stuff, and even as a CISO, there's a whole bunch of stuff with the proper agents and the proper security architecture internally. A lot of the stuff that I can do can be rapidly accelerated, right? So that I can focus on more important problems, whether it's compliance, it's automated compliance, regulation reviews, all that stuff. That stuff's going to be addressed very quickly. Um, and then, threat surface analysis, attack surface analysis, incident response. Those are all areas where AI, I think, is really going to augment the security operations person.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that is true. I feel like there's areas that it would be able to, replace a headcount potentially, right?
Mhm.
But like with everything, um, typically you're going to find that the industry will cut, so severely because they think that they're going to save
Mhm.
all this money with having this LLM or this AI thing and getting rid of all these people, and then they're slowly going to be adding them back in. Like if you look and if you actually follow it, Microsoft laid off like what 200,000 people in the past 18 months or something like that. I mean, like it's a significant amount of people that they laid off. Google did, the same thing, probably a different amount of people, obviously, Meta, everyone. And now they're hiring in other areas. They're hiring in other
Yeah.
key areas
Mhm.
because they're finding, oh, okay, we didn't need as many marketing people, to do this work. We can
Mhm.
augment it with this other tool over here, and then we can divert those funds somewhere else.
That's right.
And so we're moving into a interesting place. But I kind of want to shift gears a
Mhm.
bit and talk about beyond identity.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about, what beyond identity is, what the problem is in the marketplace
Right.
that you're solving for, and how you're doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, fundamentally, we're a secure access platform built from the ground up to address the new identity threat landscape. So we target identity threats directly, and we design them out. We try to move as much from detection to prevention. Um, and it kind of takes advantage, and we do that by providing. I mean, if you look at Zero Trust, we provide phishing resistant MFA. We'll get into why I think most of the legacy phishing MFA we know is not good enough anymore. But at its underpinnings, it has phishing resistant MFA. It has strong device credentials and device posture. Um, so it can do continuous authentication. We have a secure access layer and SSO. And now we're starting to expand into kind of collaboration tooling like Reality Check, which is basically targets deepfakes. And so the problem fundamentally was and it was a reimagining. It was from our founders and one of our founding CTO, Jason Casey, who had very early on recognized, I think, long before I certainly did, and a lot of other people in the industry, that there was something radically changing. So where you had on the IT side, which was doing mostly productivity, and that's where all the identity solutions were. It was really about workflow management orchestration. And most of the security threats were at the network layer. So all your engineers, that war between the red teams and the blue teams was all at the network layer. As we started to move out and everybody started using SaaS applications, bring your own device. You saw an explosion. You saw an explosion of all of that layer, and it exposed an identity substrate where it was completely vulnerable. And then the IT guys, who were awesome people, but they were focused on workflow optimization and identity management, all of a sudden had an entirely new security problem, which was identity. And all of the security engineers were trained for the last war.
Hmm.
right? Which was network penetration, malware, once you penetrate a device, you do lateral movement. Totally wasn't going to work anymore. So that's kind of where Beyond Identity came from. And we started with phishing resistant passwordless back in 2019, long before anybody else had a enterprise level solution, had a lot of success there. And then we expanded into, like I said, the device posture. We have an offering called Device 360 that allows you to look at your device fleet, recognizing that, the real problem, and when you get down to it, if you follow the user's life cycle, right, and this is the next generation kind of secure access platform, they start on a device, they go to the access plane, and then they get to an application. Makes sense, right? A new platform has to follow that entire journey from the device to the access layer and then finally to the application. And again, one of the things we're really excited about right now is our reality check solution that targets AI deepfakes. And that is only made possible because we can tie the device to the session to the user.
Hmm.
And we can tell you who's actually on that call. So on our platform, you can't it eliminates that deep fake threat. But anyway, so that's kind of where Beyond Identity came from. And we're having a lot of success at large enterprises, Fortune 50, all the way down to SMBs.
Hmm. Yeah, that is pretty fascinating. You know, it was, I think it was right around 2019 probably when I started to actually follow,
Mm-hmm.
Beyond Identity a little bit, right? Because you were starting to do things differently. And
Mm-hmm.
the problem with identity security overall, just IAM,
Mm-hmm.
is it's typically an arduous experience for any sort of end user, really. I mean,
Yeah,
you got to think about it, right? So you're not going to remember 10 or 12 different passwords. I mean,
that's
it's
right.
just not going to happen, and if it happens, cool. But guess what? You're going to have to change them all eventually, and you're going to be relearning them, right? So
Yep.
now you move it into a password vault, which is great. I mean, I use a password manager myself. I use
Mm-hmm.
one password. It's great. Does its job. Does exactly what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so now I have this solution over here that has complex passwords in it for all
Mm-hmm.
these different websites. Um, but still, for someone that's not technically savvy, right? My wife is a teacher, and I
Mm-hmm.
try to get her to start using, one password, and it's just
Still a
not going to
problem.
happen. It's never going to happen,
So
right?
you bring up a good point, and you mentioned the usability. So fundamentally, the enterprise and the consumer, at least on the surface, have very different requirements. But when it comes to passwordless, so let's even move away from passwords, just say it's secure authentication and secure access, right? They kind of look very similar because with an enterprise, you have to meet the user where they are, and they have these massive heterogeneous environments. Some are deeply technical, where you can put a PA in or a platform authenticator, and you can device posture. Others, you have to use a FIDO key, or we have a solution which is called a hosted web authenticator, which allows us to engage the user just in the browser, provide security there. So even with the consumer, a password vault, that's a starting point, but it's not okay anymore, right? And we see that a lot of times at the enterprise level as well, where they have these, they weren't clear about how they were going to deploy the next generation MFA or a phishing resistant MFA. So they deployed an MFA, which is really just another factor on top of passwords. And so now they have these large heterogeneous environments where in some places they have phishing resistant password solutions. In other places they have um, MFA solutions that are not phishing resistant, which they can be easily bypassed today. And the other thing they run into is the user experience is horrible. Like if even in an enterprise, when you try to push an edict out, if the users don't, you're outnumbered. You worked on the IT side, you're outnumbered by your users. And if your users refuse to use something, it's really, really hard to get it deployed. And that's another thing that Beyond Identity, again, I know we're not supposed to be pitching our product here, but it's what just from my personal experience, if you don't focus on the usability, whether you're on the consumer side or the enterprise side, It's just not going to work.
Right. Yeah, I've deployed privileged access management solutions before to pretty
Hmm.
large companies, and I've beaten every record that that vendor had of previous
Hmm.
deployments of size and speed and capability and
Hmm.
everything else like that, right? And so a huge part of that deployment, I'm deploying it
Hmm.
to probably 12,000 12,000 individual
Yep.
people, about 100,000 individual accounts, including onboarding, servers and,
Right.
all these other workloads and whatnot. And maybe the biggest part of that was actually vocalizing it and kind of, going around and making sure that all the people in the company were on board with this, right? And the biggest thing was explaining it to them in a way that, related to like not only just their job, but what's at risk, and it was very convenient for me because one of our competitors had a breach very recently
Of
in that
course.
time
Yep.
frame. So I could literally say, like, hey, they had a breach this exact way that we're trying to protect against, right? Like,
Hmm.
I know this makes your day a little bit
Hmm.
longer. It's a little bit more difficult for you to log into this server that has, all these social security numbers on it, right? Like, I know that.
Let me interrupt there for a second. You know what's really interesting, and this is one of the things that we as an industry have to change. Um, why would a solution with no password be less usable than a solution with a password? It is kind of interesting, and oftentimes that's the case, right? Because again, the security wasn't the like I said, you have to push security into the product, and that's happening. But you also have to push usability, and that's exactly the feedback that I've seen in the market. Is your solution has to be low friction
Hmm.
because we're trying to get users to authenticate and access safely. That it must include it's got to be easy to use because if it doesn't, they're not going to use it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've seen it where users immediately start trying to just go around the product no matter what. They try to have like perpetual, SSH sessions going and RDP sessions going, and
Oh, it's
they're logging into what I was at a company and we had this fantastic solution, right? Where if you didn't log into a server for a certain amount of time, you would lose access and you'd have to re-request it. Right. The
yeah,
request just goes to your manager, they approve it, you get the access. It's
yeah,
a
typical
it's like
IGA,
a
yeah,
it's like an early form of just-in-time access.
yeah, PAM, IGA, yeah.
Yeah. So I was talking to like one of our top engineers slash developers, right? And he went and, just all willy-nilly just logged into a bunch of different servers, right off the bat, and he wasn't doing anything in them. And I'm on security, but he likes me. I have a way
Mm,
about getting people to talk to me probably more than they should. And so I was asking him, I was like, why do you log in, once a week or whatever it is to get in to these servers if you're not doing anything? And I'm like, what's the purpose? You could really be opening up the environment to a foothold
mhm.
if your
Right,
device ever got compromised.
right, that's right.
And he's like, well, I have to log in, maybe once a month, once a quarter to actually do work. But at that interval, I have to go and like request permission, every time I log in, and it,
Oh, you're
my
kidding
manager
me.
isn't always available, and like he had a whole list of excuses, and I'm like, man, we have this multi-million-dollar solution that we just deployed and bought, and
Yeah,
we were talking about it with everyone, vocalizing how great it is and everything, and this guy is just having no part of it. He's getting right around it. And there's
yeah,
literally nothing you can do about it because he literally said, "Yeah, if it changes, I'm just gonna start writing a script that has a perpetual,
right.
inactivity monitor on it that'll just forever keep me active."
So you hit a key point for me, or you're making a key point where it's a real pet peeve for me. And again, some of the legacy solutions that have tried to adapt from the identity side and the IT side have created all these add-ons and bolt-ons, and it starts to look like it looks like security through configuration,
Yeah.
right? Which is a really, really bad model, right? You want security by default. And one of the pet peeves I have is, and again, it's all about PAM, privileged access management. There's a lot of great stuff going on there and extending it, but fundamentally, the question you have to ask is why does why do privileged accounts have a different access management solution than everyone else?
Yeah.
So I think there's, again, it's rethinking the security solution. At the end of the day, when we talked about the access layer, you start from the device, cryptographically bind that, all that great stuff, device credentials, continuous auth. But even in the access layer, if that's built properly for the future, you have all of that privileged access management built into that access layer that's available for all accounts all the time. And you shouldn't be running into these kinds of problems. And that individual, that just wouldn't even be a problem because that's an artifact of having a really complex system that is, it's no one's fault. It's just how we all got there organically. That is security through configuration,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
which
a
is a
really good
bad
point.
model, by the way.
Yeah, you really have to take kind of the guesswork out of it. You know, there should be no questions about it. There are, more advanced ways of authenticating a user in a network and whatnot, right? Like,
Yep.
with zero trust, if you want access to an application, you have to meet a certain, criteria with your
Mm-hmm.
device. You don't have to worry about, getting onto a VPN, logging into that VPN,
That's
then
right.
logging into a server to get you access and whatever it might be, right? I I was working for a company that's been around for 100 years, whatever it might be, like
Mm-hmm.
probably 100 years, and so they had this siloed. It's like a three-tiered AD architecture, right?
Oh,
Where
yikes.
they had it was Microsoft built it for them, and then Microsoft coined the term and wrote a whole document on it because this company paid them so
Yeah.
much money. They were just like, here's a blank check,
I can
design
guess
this
who it is.
thing, build it all out, right? And it was like a early iteration of zero trust where you put
Mhm.
your crown jewels into one environment, you shut off all access to that one environment, and God forbid you ever have to log into that environment because by the time you log in, your sessions are going to start timing out and you can't do anything. You can't manage that infrastructure.
Yeah.
And when I was diving into, this architecture with the engineer that was around when he set it up, he was actually retiring, right? So it was pretty important for me to get an understanding of that environment. I started diving into, okay, well, you say, nothing can touch it. How do you patch it? Right. And he said, oh, we have to log in and patch it manually from this console or whatever. Like, okay, that's fine. Well, how do you get the patches there? Do you like download them on prem and then transfer them over through some
Right.
secured, you know, SCP process, right? And he goes, "Oh no, there's a connection out to the internet and it pulls it down through, the official repository and everything." I'm like,
Mm.
"Okay, well that's a great idea, but you know how the federal government does it, right? Where they interact with a vendor, they verify those patches, in some secured environment. They shoot it up to a satellite, and that satellite is the only thing that's allowed to connect to that internal environment,
Hmm.
and
That's
it's
right.
on every repo, it has a special key and everything else like that.
Yep. Yep.
Like, you're trying to replicate that without doing that. And you start going down this rabbit hole of finding out, oh, this thing hasn't been patched in 4 years. Or
Yeah.
oh, this system isn't even used anymore, but it's active in this environment for this one authentication token that breaks everything else if it ever gets turned off.
Yeah. I mean, I know people overuse the term zero trust, but zero trust is real and material. Um, as far back as 2007, some of the earliest TCG, Trusted Computing Group, architecture around TPMs and secure elements, to the famous Black Core document issued by the government, which is the next generation security architecture, which was the beginning. They didn't call it that yet, but it was the very, very beginnings of zero trust. This is not a trend. This is deep security experts have realized that to ensure trust, it has to start at the device,
Yeah.
right? And then it has to go up, and you have to cryptographically bind the entire life cycle to the destination. You just have to do that. And that, like with your satellite example, there's a huge push. So the DoD has made it an absolute imperative that all corporate government corporate networks are zero trust by February 2007. That's a hard edict. All military networks by
Hmm.
2035.
Hmm.
It's not. Um, I think there's. I was listening to the CISO of the DoD give a talk at RSA, and I think there's 145 different networks that they have to kind of manage and understand. It's crazy, but zero trust principles are grounded in real deep engineering. Um, and fundamentally, it has to start with, like I said, the root of trust. You at a company have to be able to build a root of trust and then extend from that. And Microsoft has made a lot of great progress there too. They use device credentials when they deploy. When you move to Entra um, and you move off hybrid or AD, a whole ton of like pass the hash, pass the token, and a lot of threats on the device disappear. Um, there's a lot of other issues with the paradigm, um, but fundamentally, it's real. It's based in real engineering principles, and you just have to get on board and understand that that's where the industry's going. Well,
Yeah.
a huge part of the industry's already gotten there, and the government's going to be there. And just as a side note, Joe, what is interesting too is everybody looks at. So I've Beyond Identity went through. We got FedRAMP moderate, and we work with partners, and we have a really strong interest in the DIB and a Fed Civ area. But what I am learning too is what I learned from that experience is that all of the compliance stuff that people look at the government and say they're slow and they're bulky. That's just not true anymore. In a lot
Hmm.
of ways, they're thinking faster um, and more strategically than the private industry, and they're driving a lot of stuff. And you're going to see some pretty significant changes around automated compliance and zero trust architectures, where the federal government's leading that. I mean, you see things like their SWIFT program and their FedRAMP 20X. There's some pretty innovative stuff going on there, and they're really in a lot of ways driving. They're going to start driving the private sector, in my mind.
Yeah. No, no, I mean
So
it's
that
definitely a
satellite stuff you're
fact.
working on is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's two areas that I want to touch on, right? Is the yeah, zero trust with the satellites. It's interesting because you're talking about, let's think about it like with a 6U server. Each U has a different component that's doing a different thing, and
Yep,
all of that has to be zero trusted.
that's
But
right.
you can't use an extreme amount of resources. You're in an environment that's extremely limited with
Yep,
resources, especially when
yep,
the satellite is on the other side of the earth and not facing the sun. Now you're running on batteries, and now you have limited resources for everything, right?
well,
And
think
so
about,
zero
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
yeah, so the zero trust in that situation then turns into a tiered architecture type of thing where you have these root nodes, right, that are at higher altitudes that you're now authenticating to, and you're verifying your
Mhm.
identity with, and you're verifying other connections with,
Yeah,
because those are the ones that then have to be focused on that process, because that's all that they do, rather than the lower tier satellites that are authenticating within itself, right?
yep.
And with
Well,
that,
if you think about that, extend that to uh, what's it called, MUMT and UAS, like manned, unmanned teaming and the drones. That just explodes. Like that wasn't a satellite. I get 4 years, still working on 4 years, but in the last 3 years, and particularly with what's going on in Ukraine, think about that times 10 for drones, right? You're going to have to do the same technology for drones, right?
yeah, yeah, 100%. And like with what you said with the military and the government really pushing the
Yeah.
forefront of this area. I mean, that's very true. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
people are just now starting to kind of like wake up to it, right? Because I feel like when I was in college, it was really viewed as like, lagging behind this huge, infrastructure that, doesn't really adapt that easily or that quickly or anything. and then Stuxnet happens, right? And then I
Yep.
read the book on Stuxnet, Zero Day, right? Kind of changed my entire mentality because they were
Oh,
doing
great.
IOC hacks long before anyone even thought of IOC as a thing, like as a thing, even being a part of someone's infrastructure. It was a
Oh, yeah.
controller that you just had
Yeah.
to run
Yeah.
in the environment. No one was thinking of it
No.
of, oh, if I manipulate this controller here, I can make this power generator over in Idaho National Laboratories, operate at such a RPM that it's not even built for, and it's going to
Mm.
explode all on its own without me having to do anything. I don't drop a bomb on it. I don't send someone with a bomb. It is the bomb itself already, and we're going to blow it up with code, right?
That's
And then
right.
you look at
And
how they built out Stuxnet and everything. I mean, that is a work of art in terms of technological engineering of what they did, right? Like having the different
yep.
modules, how it sat there and waited
Mm.
for an undetermined amount of time, just waiting for the right
Oh, yeah.
system to log into it, and how it was even querying that system to get the device properties and whatnot. It wasn't doing normal queries. They had to create this whole
Mm.
query language around it just to figure it out in a very stealth manner, right? And
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
it's no, it's absolutely crazy. And when you start realize, so I think the takeaway for me there is, again, I think the government in a lot of ways is driving a lot of this technology. And I think the enterprises that need to deploy a solution just because that's not their business, they need to secure their business, really need to look for vendors that understand soup to nuts, the role device attestation um, and secure, like, zero trust architecture plays into that, because it's really pretty intense what you can do now, and everything has to start now. It has to start at root of trust. I mean, if you were to say to an enterprise today, or even a small business for that matter, "Hey, we just want to verify the hardware supply chain when the device authenticates," right? They're like, "Yeah, that just seems like such a secondary, tertiary problem. I've got other things to solve." But that's not the case anymore. That's a real problem that needs to be dealt with today, and it needs to be part of a default solution because the attackers, we think we're more sophisticated because in the startup industry, the private sector, we're doing all the kinds of innovation. The threat actors aren't, they have their own startup ecosystem. They really do, and it's funded by nation states. So we have VCs, they have nation states that fund that whole ecosystem. And it's changing and growing quickly, and the attacks are getting more and more sophisticated.
yeah, yeah, it's very true. Stuxnet was only the beginning of
Oh
of
yeah,
what we're seeing. I mean, you look at the pager attack
yeah.
that Israel pulled
Supply
off against
chain,
Iran. I mean, that is th- that is one of the most impressive compromises
yeah,
that we've ever seen, right? That we'll know about in the public eye.
that's right.
And even just with the recent bombings in Iran, right? I'm sure that we'll hear more details about it in like 15 years, right?
Mm.
When some people that were tied to it probably like pass away or whatnot. But just thinking about the logistics that go into it, I had on someone a few weeks ago from the CIA that
Oh
specialized
gosh.
in WMDs and monitoring them and tracking them throughout the world and whatnot. And he was talking about the precision that these pilots had to have with dropping those bombs. And if you look at the satellite images, there's one hole, right? That means that those pilots literally dropped multiple bombs
Hole
into
in
the
one.
same exact hole to make sure, because they knew that those bombs are only going to go down so far, right? So they hit that target. Well, maybe the facility is below that. Well, they just
Mhm.
kept on dropping them, and I mean that alone, to know where to drop it, to know, you know, the infrastructure inside and everything like that, the logistics behind it is so
Yep.
impressive. It's not like anything
It's
that we've seen before or even dreamt of, in decades
no,
prior.
no, and I think with that high tech stuff, I think zero trust architecture and solutions that kind of incorporate that in for the enterprises by default are going to be really successful. Um, but it's just, again, the level of sophistication. As we get more sophisticated, the attackers get sophisticated. And me personally, on my journey through cybersecurity, coming from product and engineering, um, I've always wanted, the first thing I do is I look at the architecture and how can I design problems out? Because I know we're going into, we have one of our marketing people that coined the MFA apocalypse. But as we get ready for this AI onslaught, it's batten down the hatches, look at your legacy ecosystem, and the gaps. There are solutions out there that can close those gaps and move it from detection to prevention, because you do not want to be in a position where you can't focus your resources away from the legacy stuff. Just button that up, get a solution that works, that's secure by design, is privacy by design, compliant by design. I mean, just out of the box, secure defaults, and focus on the new threats. I mean, the last thing you want to do is be looking over your shoulder saying, hey, did I really close the back door? Because there's stuff coming.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Bob, unfortunately, we're at the top of our time
Ah,
here. It was a fantastic conversation. Like we went down so many
yep.
rabbit holes. It's always great having these sorts of
Mhm.
conversations with people of your caliber and experts in the
Thank you.
field. Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you if they wanted to connect with you and
Yep.
reach out, and where they can find Beyond Identity.
Sure. First and foremost, beyondidentity.com, beyondidentity.com. You can go to our website. You can also go to our Beyond Identity / podcast, and you'll see a lot of the latest stuff. And hopefully, this will be up there pretty soon. And then we're all going to be at Black Hat. So we have a huge presence at Black Hat. So anybody who's going to be there, they should reach out to us. And we look forward to seeing you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Bob, and thanks everyone for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode.
I
I know
did.
I did
It's a
for
great
sure.
service, Joe.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone. I'll I'll stay tuned with the next one.
Hey, one last thing, Joe.
All right.